The question I have for myself is not whether or not there are minor cracks. My only question is, are there people in my life who love me enough to call me out?
Peter, the battle that we're up against as leaders isn't a battle against flesh and blood. We know that. And the enemy is out to distract us. If you're a ministry leader, everyone on this call, you're on the front line of the battle, and the stakes are high for us. The effect of our actions go far and wide. And it's so sad that we've seen many big names in the Christian community recently who lost their way. So, you've written a book about this. Could you talk to us about what led you to writing this book and what are you seeing?
You said this, but I want to just reiterate it. I do not write from a place of saying, I figured it out. Now let me share my wisdom. I write from a place of seeing an issue and then knowing myself well enough to know that I can make a mess of things too. So let's learn, let's grow, let's go on the journey. And it's just as you said, Nina, it was some people that I looked up to. It was some leaders within the Christian faith and within the nonprofit who made decisions that seemed to me to be out of alignment with the way that they had lived to that point, out of alignment with what they valued, out of alignment with the work that they were doing. And I started to ask this question, how does this happen? Or maybe a different question, and why does it keep happening? In fact, there's one study that Robert Clinton did, and he says in scripture, only 1 out of 3 leaders finish well, meaning they don't significantly abuse their power, platform, or privilege. Sometimes they blow up and sometimes they fizzle out, but only 1 out of 3 finish well, which means statistically, it is easier for me and for you to not finish well than it is to finish well. And so we went on this journey and tried to understand what is it? What is it that happens in here that causes us to lose our way? And in many ways, a decade ago, we wrote the book Mission Drift. And this was really an exploration of mission drift, not at an organizational level, but mission drift at a leadership level. And I think you're totally right, Nina. If a leader loses his or her way, um, I think the enemy absolutely rejoices, knowing the impact not just on an individual, not just on a family, not just on those closest, but also on the missions that God has called us to and the impact of a watching world. In fact, one study found that 24% of people that walk away from faith in Jesus do so because someone that they looked up to made decisions that were out of alignment with what it is that they spoke about or believe. So there is a lot at stake. It is easier to lose our way than to not lose our way. And that was the origin of saying, let's study, let's learn, and then let's put some ideas into practice that can guard our own hearts.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, you've said that well. The cost is high of losing our way, and the chances are, or it's easier statistically for us as leaders to lose our way than to not. So that's quite a scary thought. And that's why I'm so grateful that we can unpack with you how does that happen? And there's a specific chapter in your book that really stood out to us, the island effect. I thought that was really clever, that talks about isolation. And as we prepared for this, we felt that that is a good one to go deeper into. Why does isolation lead to leaders losing their way? What is it about isolation specifically that causes that?
Yeah, and in many ways, Nina, we were trying to identify what are some of the contributing factors. And as we listened to leaders share their story, I was amazed by the commonality that we heard. It was
Mm.
different context, it was different geography, it was different sector, but it was the same story again and again, the same contributing factors. And one of the things that we literally heard verbatim was no one really knew what was going on. No one really knew some of the challenges. And I think as leaders, oftentimes the more we have kind of growth in ministry, oftentimes we can use this mental gymnastics of saying, well, I can't let people know that I'm struggling because then it might reflect poorly on the ministry. So what do? We stuff it down. We just compact. We just stuff it down. And then that's compounded by the more we get in our work, the more opportunities there are for travel and conferences, the more disconnected we are to community. The busier our calendars become and the emptier our souls happen as a result. And so this question of isolation, we heard it again and again that isolation is lethal. Isolation is one of the major issues. And ironically, isolation increases with time, not decreases. As people grow in their influence, as people grow in their leadership, their deep connections with others decreases. And there's this term in psychology called the Johari window, and it's a simple two by two, but it looks at issues in our life that are known to others and not known to others. And then on the other axis, it's known to self and not known to self. And so we talk about this in terms of if other people see something in our life, but we don't see it in ourselves, what are those called? Like those are called blind spots. And we need friends that say, hey, when you said that, this might not have been your intention, but this is what it communicated. Or this issue that you have in your life, because I care about you, I want to point something out. And the reality is none of us on this call, none of us can identify our blind spots, but we all have them. The question is not if we have blind spots or not. The question is, do we have friends who love us enough to actually tell us about those blind spots? But then there's this other box that is equally, and I would say even more dangerous. It's issues that we know we're dealing with, but no one else knows. So that other quadrant in the Johari window, and those are the issues that we just hope will go away, are left unaddressed. And I've just heard too many stories that unaddressed issues do not go away on their own. They only grow, they only get bigger. And so, what is the contributing factor in so many of the stories that we heard? It's that they didn't have a small group of safe friendships where literally nothing was off the table. There was nothing that would not be pointed out, and there was nothing that they are dealing with that they could not share with others. And I think for us as leaders, the question is this box that we have, are we putting more things in it? Or are we slowly emptying that box out with trusted friends? Leadership is not a journey to take alone. We need others to be with us on the journey.
Yeah, the compound effect of that is a little bit scary, Peter. This box analogy that you spoke about now is really that makes a lot of sense. But why do we do that as leaders? Why? And maybe unpack what you mean with this box that we keep putting stuff in and we keep pushing it down. Why do we have this box and we hide? Could you talk to us about that?
Yeah. And again, so I can't answer that for other people. Maybe I can just answer it for myself.
Hmm.
Why is it that I find it difficult? And I think there's one area of, again, the work that we do, right? We are seen as Christian leaders. And in some ways, the false narrative is, well, I'm a Christian leader, so I can't be honest with the challenges that I'm facing. And I would just say that is wrong. That is not true. Every single one of us has issues in our life where we are drifting. Every one of us has issues that left unaddressed. They will not lead us to a place of long-term missional faithfulness. They will lead us to a path of small compromises. So I think the first issue that we have to just remember is every single one of us, every single one of us has issues we're dealing with. I think the other kind of key piece is it really is just this pace. Travel erodes deep commitment to community. And I don't know about you, but my guess is for a lot of us, we have more opportunities to travel than is good for our soul. And so this idea of just not being grounded and having a calendar that's full of activities and not having those times and spaces for friendship to actually develop. That's the easiest thing because it doesn't feel productive. It doesn't feel like, well, this is what and I just think there was this one stat that really stopped me in my tracks, but it said the average male will make no lifelong friendships after the age of 36 on average. And so what happens is slowly there's an erosion of friendships, oftentimes by benign neglect, And yet, so we have all these relationships with work, but we don't have friendships where everything can be lived and shared. And I think that if everyone around us is people that are business associates or somehow connected, we're missing out on one of the most amazing gifts that God has given us. And that's the gift of friendship, that individuals who want nothing from us and want things for us to just be on the journey together. And so those are some of the reasons I think why friendship is so important, but it feels like the easiest thing when life is full, and life is full for all of us. We oftentimes don't have what we say we believe about friendship modeled with what we do this week and the times that we spend with others. So yeah, and I gave that stat. It's different. This one particular study was a little different, male and female, and men did tend to have more isolation in that one particular study. But my guess is it's an experience that we all have. When life feels full, it takes work. It does not just, you don't drift into real, great, vibrant friendships. That takes work and intentionality in our lives.
It's so good, Peter, and it really resonates. We don't drift into those real friendships. And what I'm hearing you say is it's not about just surrounding you with people. It's about more than that. That's where the crux actually comes in, is what's the nature of those relationships. And in your book, you discuss a powerful case study. You've really broken that open for me. And that's where the light went on for me, where you compared King David and King Solomon. Could you talk to us more about what their example teaches us?
Ah, so interesting because they both went off the rails, right? They both had issues where they drifted in their life. And in many ways, David, Solomon's dad, knew the dangers of drift. And he literally told his son, he's like, obey all the commands of the Lord as he's giving this final commissioning. Don't drift. Keep your eyes on what is most important. And yet, King Solomon started with this position of beautiful humility, and yet over time led to this pride and hubris and went a series of increasingly egregious behaviors. But this is where the story is so different. When David started going off the rails, we know that he had people who called him out. And what was most famously, we know the story of Nathan the prophet who comes to him and tells him a story about a beloved sheep and then looks at him and says, you are that person. And David's response was repentance. He comes back. Um, and we also know that Joab, his commander, when David wanted to do the census, which was really just an exercise in pride, Joab says that's a bad idea. We know that David had a friend, Jonathan, who was a lifelong friend. And there's a couple other instances where individuals, even though David was the king, he had individuals who called him out and in essence said, you're going the wrong way. Come back, David, come back. And yet I find it so interesting to contrast that with King Solomon as he was making equally egregious decisions. Guess how many times anyone called him out? There were prophets living at the time. How many prophets showed up at his doorstep? Zero. How many times do we see an example of a friendship saying, I don't think that's a good idea? How many times do we see individuals saying, Solomon, that's not a good decision? And the answer is zero. Solomon was never challenged. And so when David started to go off track, he had friends and prophets, and even people within his own kind of kingdom that called him back. And I think that's what made the difference with King David. And yet Solomon, no one ever called him in. He went further and further away. So literally God's announcement, God's pronouncement on the reign of King Solomon is Solomon has completely abandoned me. He totally walked away and no one ever called him out. No one ever said, Solomon, that is not the way to go. No one ever said, Solomon, come on back. Zero instances. And so I think that's so sobering for you and me. And the question that I have is not whether or not we are going off track. The question I have for myself is not whether or not there are minor cracks. My question is not whether I'm making unwise decision. My only question is, Are there people in my life who love me enough to call me out and to say, come back? And I think that's where those stories of David and Solomon over time, there just is a greater and greater distance. And so I think this hymn, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing, Robert Robinson wrote it when he was a young man, and he wrote these words. He said, prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. And I just love that. It's a recognition of, yeah, we all are drifting. Lord, bring us back. Bring us back. And I think that's where we need those trusted friendships who love us enough to tell the friend. And just one final word on that. King Solomon knew this. He knew the importance of this. In fact, one of the Proverbs that he wrote, Proverbs 27:17, says this. He says, wounds from a friend can be trusted. He knew how important, and yet in his own life, he never had any friends who loved him enough to inflict a few wounds that I think would have made an impact in his life and would have made a difference in his leadership.
Oof, that is very sobering, like you said, and a heartbreaking comparison. So Peter, that makes total sense, and I can hear that that's the one thing that made the difference is having those friends who's willing to cause a wound because they love you enough. I'll be honest, it sounds a bit scary. Like who would want this discomfort and like want to be called out all the time? Could you guide us in our thinking of how do we desire and value this so much that we put ourselves in that position, that we nourish and seek out those friendships instead of drawing back into this comfortable position of just being encouraged and affirmed all the time? Because in this moment, listening to it, it makes total sense. How do we walk away and desire that?
Nina, I think it is looking at the alternative. It's looking at the alternative. And as we started to do this study, I sincerely, sincerely mean this. I had no idea just how common and how much harm there is when a leader loses his or her way. The stories that we heard and the heartache, I mean, it was, I cried doing the research and having conversations with individuals because they never thought it would happen to them. They they just stopped paying attention and it was so subtle and so easy and so heartbreaking. And so part of what got my attention is you hear enough of these stories, and I have not an ounce anymore of, I can't believe they did that. I have I have a whole lot of Lord help. Lord be gracious. Lord show me in your mercy as soon as possible when the consequences are smaller or subtler than left unaddressed. And there's this healthy amount of understanding of the personal, of the familial, of the organizational, and of the cultural harm that happens when people lose their way. And so understanding the pain leads me to, if I can do something to prevent that, you better believe I would choose an ounce of prevention over a pound of cure, right? I would choose to say I'm off track in the early years as opposed to I gotta dramatically make some difference. I would rather know where I'm causing harm to people around me than to let that harm go unaddressed for a long period of time. So there is a healthy um, element of the stakes are so high for us. And Lord, be gracious and let me pay attention. Let me see. And I think that really is this whole project understanding how easy it is to drift, understanding how common it is to drift, and understanding there are certain things that if we put into practice, there is no immunity, but it will help us dramatically be more aware of the areas where we're just slowly ticking off track. And one of those is the gift of friendship. So that's a long answer, Nina, but I think for us to understand what's at stake here, what's at stake in what God is doing in the world, what's at stake in the people that we care about. What's at stake? And I think that leads us to pay attention, pay attention, pay attention, and put some things into practice that I think will help us, not have immunity, but help us have some warning signs, some things that will help us see when and where we're slowly going off track. So that's my heart, and that's like literally, I just so desperately want to be as I've seen modeled by other people in my life whose lives are modeled by long-term faithfulness. I want that. I want that for you. I want that for me. I want more stories of long-term faithfulness in response to God's unbelievable grace in our life. I want that. And again, you don't just drift there. That's going to take some work and it's going to be clarity about direction. And it's going to take a group of people going on this journey together to say, let's pursue what is most important. Let's not lose our way.
Whew. Amen. I'm fired up. Thank you for sharing that, Peter. I'm so glad you unpacked that. I literally feel my heart beating a little bit more intensely. And as you spoke, I was thinking, who am I going to message after this call? Because
Mm.
the stakes are so high. So thank you for unpacking a bit more of that so that we could share in what you've seen. You've seen it and your heart broke. And so what a gift to can get a glimpse of that. So I'm sure there's many other leaders who's also fired up and ready to go and encouraged by what you just shared. So to those who realize they do not currently have that level of trust or candor or those quality of friendships and relationships, where do we begin?
Mm. I mean, one of the things that I love about the work that 54 does is it is rooted in prayer. And I'm not being facetious. I'm saying start there. Lord, I need this. I don't have this. Would you help me find? Like, that's a great place to start. And then I think the other piece is you don't need 30 people. You need a small number of people that you're going to do life with. And I think thinking through who are those people, and my guess, Nina, is most of the time when we identify those individuals and when we might actually say, hey, I recognize I need it, and I recognize we just haven't had as much time together as I really would like. Would you be willing to? Da, 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 da. Most of the time, the response from that individual is going to be a recognition. You know what? I feel the same way. I need it too. This is not just something that we're dealing with. This is again, all the stats, all the studies say we are increasingly disconnected from true and meaningful and mutual friendships. And so I wouldn't be surprised if the response is, I would love that. And me too. And if not, that's okay. There's other people. And so I would just say prayerfully go and start looking. And then the key is taking an idea and putting it into practice. And for me, just personally, this idea of constellation mentoring was so helpful that every January, I was struck that I would map my goals and my priorities and my activities. But over time, I came to realize, you know what's more important than that? The friendships, the people. And so I create a map of the people. And so it's a constellation mentoring model that has just been so helpful to say, what are the areas that I want to learn and grow in this year? And who am I going to seek out to guide me? And I do a 2-2-2 system. Who are two people? Well, it's four people, but who am I going to ask to meet two times for 2 hours? And it's a 2-year rolling thing. So two times a year for 2 hours each for a 2-year commitment. And then I'm able to reach out and say, would you guide me? I want to learn and I want to grow in this particular area. That's been so helpful. And then I think about my core four. Who are those people that I'm going to journey with? And there's not a lot of rotation on them. It's the same people. And we meet every Friday morning, and it's just a standing calendar appointment that we have. And then those people that I want to pour into, who are the people that I'm going to be engaging with this particular year? And then who are the people that I'm going to be as my prayer partners? And so it takes this idea about every January being intentional about my relationships, and not just my activities. And to me, I would say this has been one of the most important things that I've done that really came out of some of the research for the book. It started a little bit before that, but it has been so helpful to be intentional about the relationships. And so again, I would just say like fill this in. And even if you don't have four, if you've got one, maybe you got two, that's okay. But just start to look at the relationships that you have and to be more intentional about the people, not just the plans that we have as we pursue this work.
Wow, love that intentionality, Peter. That's what we do, right? We map out our goals at the beginning of every year, and we're so good at planning all of that, but we neglect the relationships because we probably assume it will drift into those really good, challenging friendships, but we don't. So, could you tell us more about how this framework shaped your leadership journey and what has it done for you?
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because you don't have the counterfactual, right? You don't have your life without it, with as much detail. So it's more conjecture, but I can tell you, literally, one of my core four, lives not too far away and we go for walks. And we've known each other since college. We were college roommates. We used to go for runs. Maybe this is an admission. We now go for walks, and we have these conversations. And he looked at me, and to me, it just was so fantastic. I was processing an issue and I was thinking about this, and he literally just stopped and he said, "Hey, Pete, you're being an idiot." Uh, and he was right. He was right. And it just like, but it's a whole thing about wounds from a friend can be trusted. I was like, I mean, couldn't you have said it a little nicer? But you're totally right. I was thinking in a way that was wrong. I was being an idiot. And to have someone who loves you enough to call you out on it, that is a gift. That is an absolute gift. So that's one place where just those little places when our thinking is off, just come back, come back, come back. That's one area. And then I think the other thing is when I think of joy, I think of the ability of being intentional about these relationships. The most incredible joy-filled moments are not things that I've experienced in isolation, but they're things that have been experienced together. Being intentional about the people that I'm pouring into and then watching them get some, significant win or breakthrough or new model or new design. That is so much fun. So I think there is more joy with more relationships. There is more joy. And yes, relationships are messy, and yes, some of them are going to break your heart. But there's more accountability, there's more joy. And I just think it's a reflection of the way that God has made us, that we need each other as sometimes difficult as it can be. We so need each other. And so that's what I would say. Help me know when I need to change direction and just brought more joy in the journey for sure.
So good, Peter. Um, amen to that. Thank you for sharing a little bit of your experience. And I love how you frame it as the fact that it's a gift, because that is what it is. And like you said, God created us to walk together. So I'm sure everyone will also experience joy and freedom as we seek out these type of friendships. So I have a really good question from a leader that talks to this. They asked, how do we ensure we love slash trust friends enough to listen even when it hurts?
That's a great question. And I don't know if there's a real simple answer to that other than uh, the long-term journey. I think this element of be with someone on the journey. And I would not recommend the first time you meet, say, all right, I'm going to get everything out of my box. Here we go. Ready? Here we go. No, it's like slowly over time. In fact, I have this friend, Terry, and he has been a mentor to me. He's been this unbelievably wise individual, and he's in his mid 70s. And he said something. We were talking about this box idea about putting stuff in. Is our box getting bigger or is our box getting smaller? Do we have people that we're emptying it out in friendship, or are we putting things in and just more and more and more? And he is in his mid 70s, and he said, Peter, for the first time in my life, there's nothing in my box. And he's been walking with his small group for like 40 years or something like that with the same group of individuals. And I thought, I'm not there yet, but I want to be. And I think see it as a journey of long term. And it's almost like, we think about investing, we think about the amazing gift of compound interest, right? And how compound interest over time makes such a difference. And it's why the habits that we have in our youth really do impact us in the long term. And I think in a similar way, I think there is a compounding benefit to friendship. I think that's where the real beauty comes with a small group of people that it literally is. We're just going to do life together. This might be a little bit unusual, but I have a group of friends, and we were talking about this issue, and we call ourselves the eulogists. Again, that's a pretty maybe unusual name, but we've committed to get together every January. Uh, Second weekend of January, we get together. It's a different spot. This year it's San Diego. And we said, we're going to do this until we are celebrating each other's lives at the very end. We're going to do this for the duration. And when we get together, this is the odd part. We've all written our eulogies and we read them. And then we have this honest conversation of like, where do we need to have a course correction? So picture a bunch of guys getting together in a beautiful location, reading their eulogies together and having honest conversation and prayer of where do we need to. So I'm not saying that's for everyone, but I am saying that the psalmist was right when he said, teach us to number our days. There is wisdom in numbering our days. There is wisdom in knowing that this is not all there is. There is wisdom in going on the journey with others and periodically, but with some sort of rigor or structure, saying, where do I need to get back on track? I promise you, that is a healthy and needed exercise. And I think part of the reason so few finish well is because so few have those regular intervals of thoughtful questioning introspection. Where do I need to get back on track? Or as Psalm 139 says, Lord, search me, know me, see if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. And I think that's a great prayer. Lord, show me where I'm drifting, show me where I need to come back on track. And to maybe regularly do that with friends, I just think that would help more of us recognize in the early stages where we need to come back on track. I think that would make a difference.
That was both a very fun and inspiring story. Two things can be same, true at the same time. I love that you shared that, Peter. It's a nice practical example of how to apply what you've shared. And you also mentioned that the compound effect of friendship and time that goes by is really powerful. So what I'm taking away is to take action. The sooner we get these relationships in place, the better. And to pray for God to show us and point us in the direction of who are those people, because He will. So there's another leader who's wondering about getting into a mentoring program, or how do we access these people? Have you heard any examples from case studies or seen something that really works in terms of finding good mentors?
Yeah, and there are, and my guess is Nina, you might know more about the particular context and maybe some great organizations that exist. There's Ardent Mentoring, which a board member of Hope International founded, Lloyd Reeb, that's fantastic. There's different cohorts models. A couple weeks ago, I was with Praxis, and that's a great kind of cohort model as well. Again, I know what is happening with 54 and know there are great relationships there for certain. So those are kind of formal ways. But I actually think there is equal power and impact and influence with with maybe in addition to some of those formal ones, going through that process of saying, what is it that you want to learn and grow in this year? And then just if you're looking for a simple starting point, go for that 2-2-2 plan. Find someone. If you're at a point and you're like, spiritually, I know I am drifting towards lukewarmness and I don't want to be lukewarm. Um, I would encourage you, find that person who you look up to, who has figured out, man, their faith is anything but lukewarm. That they're and ask them, would you be willing to meet with me for like that's a great relatively informal way of growing in relationship with others. And when I did that. I said, I'll read whatever book you recommend. I will come up with questions. The onus of responsibility is not on the owner, it's on us. Like, it's on us. What can we do to plan, to prepare, to actively find? And if you're sitting back waiting for someone to kind of say, I want to mentor you, I don't know if that happens very much. But I do know when I've reached out to individuals, it's not 100%, but a lot of individuals have been so gracious to help me learn and grow. So I would say look for maybe those formal programs. And Nina, maybe you have a lot of other recommendations, but then also just that more relatively informal of find the areas that want to learn and grow. Don't say mentorship. That's so vague to me. I don't know what that means. If someone says, would you mentor? If I go to someone, I don't know what that means, but say, would you help me grow in, and then fill in the area, fill in the category. That allows a level of focus. And to me, it has been very valuable in the journey that I've been on. So I don't know, find the formal programs, but also maybe that more informal area. Do the work. Where do you want to grow? Who do you look up to that has modeled that particular area? And then with some level of specificity, ask if they'd be willing to go on the journey with you.
Great, that's nice and practical. Where do you want to grow? Find the person you look up to in that area. And love what you said about, the word mentoring is quite overused. It's so clear to say, I want to grow in
Mhm.
insert and asking them to do that. Do you have a similar phrase, or how have you approached your friends? So I'm thinking, for example, I'm going to be messaging a few of my really trusted friends I've walked with for a long time, but how do I start this conversation with them? Have you got a few questions that you ask each other every time you get together to make sure we don't just have a comfortable conversation, even if you don't have the energy to go deep? What helps you get there?
Yeah, and this has probably changed in different seasons of my life. Um, the season that I'm in right now is Uh, no framework needed. We just we're just doing it. And I know last time I was with you and Ian, I literally had a firm stop because I was going into that call that is a standing meeting on my calendar. And there it's, you're talking about personal and you're talking professional and you're praying together. That's all that's needed at this stage. And there is full permission and expectation that we are beyond surface level. We're going to the real issues, the real things that there are few people that you can have that level of just trust and disclosure. Like literally, I'm having a hard time this week, or you guys were praying and guess what happened? Like that's just fun to have those friendships. So at that point, no longer needed. But there's a bunch of questions. At one point, we did have more of a formal list, and we did it a few times. And the last question was always, did you just lie to me on any of your responses? So in the early years, that was kind of like just a fun way of saying, did you really share? Is there anything you're not? And there were a few times there's a little bit of conviction of, yeah, that maybe there's a little more. So anyway, I think huge area of variety. Do what works for you, do what's life-giving. But again, I think the key is the long term. That's, in my experience, where the real benefit is. Known and trust, both of those increase over time. You are more known the more life you do together. And if you have those right individuals, trust is increasing as you journey together. And to be to a place where it is almost fully known and almost fully trusted, oh, that is the most incredible friendship when you have both of those things true.
Wow, what you're describing sounds incredible, and I wish that for every leader on this call. Peter, another question from a leader. Do you have any thoughts around whether these meetings are face to face or online? I know you shared that your one is online, but any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think my experience is relationships are really hard to establish online, but they can be maintained. It's just different. If I'm meeting someone for the first time and we are only interacting online, that's good. But that's a totally different experience if we have just spent, you know, whatever the amount of time in person and then it's nurtured on time. So the friendships that we have on that Friday morning time, they've all been in-person relationship. We get together in person, but with travel, with all of that, we can't physically be together every week. And so that's online. So I would say a both and approach. It's incredibly special when we're together in person. And it's incredibly special with frequency that we can get together also online. My other friend that we go walking together, I'm so glad that we are physically together. And I think walks together are so underappreciated. I like how many times in scripture, whether it's the road to Emmaus or you just read the stories of Jesus, and there was a lot of walking involved. And I think there's something great when your body and your mind and to me, just that going for a walk with friends, that's great. So that's the other thing that I do regularly as well. But I'm very big on principle and very loose with practice, meaning the principle is we need others that are known and trusted. How we do that, figure out what works for you in this season, in this stage, and do it with intentionality.
Great. Love what you said about the walks, and scientifically that's been proven to be true. So let's get walking and talking with good friends. Peter, um, a question from a leader. Often people or and organizations will say that they are open to feedback. We've heard this many times, but yet when you do give feedback, it triggers defensiveness or it somehow lands badly. Have you found a way to give constructive feedback in a way that's received well?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I feel that. I don't know that. I think that's why the book of Proverbs talks about wounds from a friend, right? Doesn't always feel good. Ouch, ouch. I don't know. I don't know that I want. And the initial response, it's so easy to go to defensiveness. So I think there is an element of training that we all can do. And so I'm not talking about giving advice to others. I'm saying what happens to you when people give it to you. And if you respond defensively, and this is true in your organization and beyond, if your initial response is defensive or that's not true or wait, but, like I guarantee that shuts down future truth tellers within the organization and in your life. It shuts them down. And the opposite is true. Thank you. And literally, I think the only thing that I should ever respond in the moment to feedback is thank you so much for telling me that. I needed to hear that. That's it. That's the end, period, not comma. That's it. And then have time to reflect and discern. And there's more work that needs to be done, but we got to make sure that we are welcoming that type of feedback. Thank you so much for telling me that. I needed to hear that. Boom, that's it. For others, I don't know what the process is. And in some ways, we're not responsible for their response. We are responsible to make sure, was it truth with as much love as possible? And I'd encourage you, do the heart work ahead of time. Lord, help me to have no other purpose other than to love this individual as you love that individual and figure out the way of sharing that. But to me, my mind goes initially, how do we respond? How do we receive? What happens in our life? And again, thank you so much. I needed to hear that.
It does take practice. That's very true. The more we practice to do that, the better we'll become at receiving. And it's such a good checkpoint to make sure, Lord, I just want to love this. I want to love them enough to do the courageous thing and give them feedback and to check that with the Lord first. So, just a very quick follow-up question. So, do you say, thank you? I needed to hear that, whether or not you agreed in that moment? Is that just like your default response? And then you go and do the work of discerning and taking it up with the Lord?
Hmm. Yep.
Okay, that's hard, but it's good. So helpful to just have that line. You don't have to think how to respond. Just say thank you and take it to the Lord.
Yep, that's right.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peter. Well, I am so encouraged and inspired, and the relational constellation map that you shared is a really helpful framework that we'll share with other leaders. I think that's a great starting point as well, a really practical place together with prayer. Is there any final words that you want to share with our leaders on the call that you've got on your heart?
The only other thing that I would say is, so we looked at leaders today and we look at leaders in history, and but over all of that was looking for the timeless truth in scripture. And one of the things that was so sobering to me in looking at the case study of King Solomon was you read the book of Proverbs, and here he is. He's telling us these really wise things. And then you look at his life and he didn't practice them. Wounds from a Friend Can Be Trusted is one of 100 examples where he wrote something down and didn't put it into practice in his life. And so I would say the same thing is true for us. It is easy for us to know what to do, but that's not enough. We know more than we obey probably already. And I would just say the bigger the gap between what you and I could probably do right now is we would say, if I had a whiteboard right behind me and we would have 5 minutes, you and I could identify the issues that should be warning signs in a leader's life of whether or not they are vulnerable to drift. We could do it. I guarantee all of you, 5 minutes, we could come up with that list. Isolation is one of them. We could come up with all of the other ones really, really quickly, but I don't think that's it because the people that drifted and King Solomon as the case study, they knew what to do. They just didn't do it. So I would say the challenge for all of us is, yes, we need to be reminded, what do we do? But then let's look at our lives. How big a gap is there between what we believe and what we obey? And that's where the danger happens. So I would just say maybe that's something that you would do with a couple friends. Come up with a list. What are the things we need to pay attention to? And what would it look like in this season in our life for us to put it to practice? So not just hearers, but doers. Not just knowing this would be a bad idea, but to actually say, how do we put some things into practice in our life? And may God help us go better than 1 for 3. Let's go 3 for 3 in living lives of courageous obedience and long-term faithfulness in the work that God has called us to do.
Amen to 3 for 3. Yeah. Thank you, Peter. Let's pay attention and be leaders who take action and um, be more like David. So I will pray for each leader on this call that that would be, that you'll find their encouragement to do that. We've heard the why. Let us go do the work and be intentional. Thank you for sharing all of this with us, Peter. It meant a lot to me, and I'm sure it meant a lot to everyone else on the call. It certainly changed how I think about my journey.